This isn't a segment that I expected to have to make, at least not so quickly. You know, this is my one day off. I run to the computer and I take a look at what's going on in the world. My one day off, I know, they don't tell you this. Live streaming is actually the hardest job in the world, but you can't say that, folks get mad at you. Seriously, though, Syria, right? What's the deal with airline food, or Syria? Look, I just ran to the computer. Look at the damn map. Damascus could fall literally any day now. The Assadist regime went from a years-long period of, tentative stability to essentially like utter collapse in a matter of no time. The Syrian civil war has always been a relatively complicated conflict, not morally, mind you. The Assadist regime is deeply evil, and if you like, there are people like support for, even like tepid support or like critical support for the Assadist regime is one of the deadest giveaways for someone who masks their like insane right-wing Russian campism as, you know, like progressivism or leftism or whatever. You know, the Assadist regime is objectively evil. There's just, you can't really have an argument on that. Now, are there other forces in Syria that are evil? Yes, but that doesn't mean there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Look, long story short, Syria's basically been a failed state for a while now, or at the very least, like not a unified state. Big old civil war, Assadist regime, like 10 million people flee the country. A lot of people in the country today are still in refugee camps because they've been displaced from their original territory. Look at all the fancy colors you got in the map. I mean, a lot of stuff's happening here. I've talked about this before on stream, and it's a contentious subject because, like, there are a lot of Syrian refugees across the West who have, like, really strong feelings on what's going on here. For the most part, they don't like Assad, which makes sense because Assad is likely the reason why they had to flee their home country. There's a lot of factionalism tied up in this, a lot of people who are trying to balance like principled anti-West opposition, which, don't get me wrong, you should hate the West, okay? It's a good, well, you know, maybe hate's a strong word, you know, maybe some of you are like the logical types, you know, hate, you know, the Star Wars movies would have something to say about your use of that emotion. No, maybe you're just very critical of Western intervention in the Middle East. Whatever term you want to use, you should be critical of the West. None of it touches on like the fundamental here, which is that, you know, Assad's balls have been needing a rocking for a while now. The collapse of the Assadist regime is a good thing. The only question is what comes afterwards, because if Syria goes from a dictatorial failed state into a dictatorial double failed state, you know, if Assad ends up getting replaced with like, you know, like it's a Taliban situation, right, where the, you know, the Afghan government is corrupt and ineffectual, but then as it falls to the Taliban, like the Taliban aren't exactly great, you know, what is replacing them? Well, I've talked about this extensively on stream, and I am cautiously optimistic that Al-Julani, one of the you know, am I pronouncing that correctly? Who knows? I'm American, okay? Who recently, by the way, did an interview with CNN where he talks about a number of things, including his like aims in the region, his past as a resistance fighter against America, and his interest in nation building. He's more or less leading this offensive, or at the very least, he's the bold, charismatic leader who has like, you know, sparked this rapid collapse of the Assadist government. And again, look, like the red used to encompass far more. Here, can I get like a time on this? Can I go back to November 1st, 3rd, whatever? You're not going to give me the colors? There we go. Yeah, there you go. Maybe I should have led with that. Like there and now today. Wow. And like the real fight, of course, is over the cities, not over whatever the hell is happening in this territory. I don't know. Lizards? There are probably lizards, scorpions out here. Who knows? Couldn't really say. There's been a march down from the south. They, of course, like you're probably, you know, familiar. They took Aleppo, and then like very rapidly they moved south and took city after Hama. Now I guess they're still fighting over here in the suburbs, but the real fighting is happening down here. Tom's and the movement north from the rebels that were in the south that just popped up, and they're fighting over Damascus. We have no idea. It's crazy. So I can't talk about the complexities of all this because half I don't want to make this too long, and half because I will, off the cuff, trying to recite all this, forget it and make a fool out of myself. I'll forget like important details, and I don't want to give you like, I don't want to give you like a bad impression of what's going on here. I want to talk about my dreams for the future of Syria. Now, you might be wondering, what dreams? I'm an American. I've never been to Syria. I have no connection to the country whatsoever. Yes, but that doesn't mean I can't dream. Dream for a peaceful, stable nation that is free of Russian or Western imperial influence. Dream that crazy dream, right? Right now, the real question is, because we've seen this play out so many times before, this is what happened with Iran. For those of you who don't recall, which is crazy because it's pretty important, but that's okay. The Shah of Iran was essentially a Western imposed autocrat, a puppet that ruled Iran largely because his rulership of Iran allowed us, favorable business dealings and access to the resources therein. The Shah was corrupt. The Shah, had opulent parties while the people starved, so on and so forth. Tehran was relatively wealthy, but the countryside of Iran was desperately, desperately poor. Eventually, the people rose up and deposed the Shah. So who then replaced them? Well, a bunch of different groups were fighting to depose the Shah. There were communists. There were just like regular citizens militias. There were people who were interested in like secular democracy. And there were radical Islamists. They got a lot of backing from the countryside. The feeling in many cases when your country's been ruled by like a foreign power, which is exactly what the Shah's rule represented, is that they represent like the stamping out of our cultural identity, which in a lot of cases encompasses religion. So the way you fight against that is by being very religious. I mean, this is literally like 101 shit. Like you look at what like Al-Qaeda does or what ISIS does. They follow the same radicalization textbook. Foreign imperialism, Westerners, Christians, they're coming in here, taking our land, our oil, or whatever. We're angry at them, and who wouldn't be, So we'll turn this that they hate against them. And usually that's kind of like the jumping off point for the radical jihadism, which, just to be clear, we don't support here. You can have like a radical liberation movement without turning to, Islamic fundamentalism. Many of the groups fighting right now in Syria, fighting for control over Syria, including HTS, again, the Al-Jilani, the leader currently heading things, are either Islamic militias or have a past rooted in Islamic fundamentalism. But, and I think that this can be substantiated if you look at recent statements made by Al-Jilani, like with his interview with CNN or the interview that he had with, I think, PBS a few years ago. I think it was PBS. The man seems actually interested in nation building. Now, what I mean by that is that there are two kinds of liberation militia leaders, I guess. There are people who want to build a cult of personality. They want to depose the leader, Assad in this case, so they can rule in his place, so they can be the big macho man with the military uniform and the brass and the so on and the so on. And usually they're not any better than the people they're replacing. It's just a change of leadership, nothing fundamentally changes. Oftentimes things get worse because you've shorted out and disrupted all the systems. You've removed the bureaucrats that kept together some semblance of functionality within the previous version of the state. The other kind are people actually interested in nation building, like a good example of this might be Castro, whatever your feelings on the guy, I say, in a loaded fashion, Castro was interested not just in liberating Cuba from Batista, but building Cuba. And did he have a cult of personality? Was he dictatorial? Yes. And yes, of course. But the man did want to build a Cuba. I think this man wants to build Syria.
After taking
is it playing audio? It is playing audio. I didn't want it to play audio. He's been deliberately moderating his message. He's claimed that diversity is our strength in an effort to keep the many disparate factions involved in the conquest of Aleppo and now upcoming of Damascus and Homs from fighting one another. He doesn't seem to want the peace to break apart. Unfortunately, it's complicated because a lot of the people that he's fighting with are like allied with Turkey, and Turkey really wants the Kurds gone. So there are allies of HTS and, Al-Jilani that are interested in fighting the Kurds, but the Kurds have been like the greatest and, most, I guess, ideologically principled liberatory force in eastern Syria for years now. You know, we are big Rojava stands here on this channel. Man, I'm naming a lot of names. I'm talking about a lot of stuff. I'm talking about a lot of specifics. I don't want to talk about specifics. Look, there's no easy road forward for Syria. There is literally no way to cut the cake, no way to draw the line, where there isn't going to be a lot of death and suffering. That's just how stuff like this tends to go, unfortunately. But the best possible way forward is a multicultural, a multi-plural coalition of all of the admittedly very diverse communities within Syria. Plenty of Muslims, yeah. Kurds, often Sunni Muslim, the majority. Of course, Kurd is an ethnicity, not like a religious group, but they kind of gone their own way in terms of their own identity. And oftentimes, of course, Kurdish people are persecuted by other Muslims for, we're getting into the specifics again. The way forward is unity. And this is possible. The Middle East wasn't always ruled by fundamentalism and, you know, foreign colonialism. And what the Middle East didn't, it wasn't always like a permanent hotbed, you know, like a blood-stricken, oil-soaked shithole. It was the center of the world for a long time. The Ottoman Empire, empires are by their nature culturally diverse. That's what an empire is. The Islamic Golden Age. We shouldn't accept things as they are and assume they're always going to be that way. Maybe the beginning of a better world. Yeah, I don't want to be too optimistic here, you know. Maybe it's not this in itself, but maybe this is part of it. I am cautiously optimistic. Does that mean things are going to work out necessarily? No, but like, damn, man, in the span of a week, the Assadist regime has just been crumbling to dust. It's not going to be long now, I don't think. I'd be very surprised if the Assadist regime manages to pull like a, you know, like a massive turnabout and somehow you know what I mean? Like, I would be shocked if they managed to pull that off. I feel like I'm not doing the complexity of this conflict justice, which, you know, it's what happens when you like stumble home and get on the computer as quickly as you can. I didn't expect them to get to Damascus this quickly. I thought I'd have a few more days, man. Look at this. Look at the green dots. They're right here. Beautiful city, by the way. I haven't been, but I'd like to go one day, you know? Syria would have to look a little bit different for me to feel comfortable going there. I think right now, if I went over there, it'd be a little bit dangerous on account of all the dots moving on the map, but maybe sometime in the future. Look, there are a few like real points that I want to counter, I guess, kind of preemptively. First of all, any defense of the Assadist regime is a non-starter. It is monstrously evil. The depths of its evil are examinable in the form of wiki article diving if you want. It's not like there's any shortage of evidence. He's not exactly quiet about being evil. You know, Bashar al-Assad and the length, you cannot defend the regime. There are people who are skeptical that Islamic militias are capable of being a genuinely liberatory force on account of historically them not being that. Again, look what happened to Iran. They ended up being the loudest voice, and when the dust settled, you know, the Islamic fundamentalists that ended up taking control of Iran executed a lot of the people who were hoping for things to play out differently after the fall of the Shah. But I think al-Jilani has done a good job putting his best foot forward. I do think I'm not an essentialist. I think that even a man who worked, you know, for a time with al-Qaeda, which I think requires some degree of radicalization, certainly at any level, you know, can change. You have to understand, and you would know this, I think, like following radicalization and how it works anywhere in the world, the Middle East, America, whatever, material forces. And Jilani has said this himself, material forces heavily influence, you know, the way we think and what our priorities are. It's often been said, like, if you were, you know, a child who lived in Iraq and you saw your parents got blown up and everyone you know got blown up, like maybe in that position, terrorism's looking awfully nice. You know, you're pretty vulnerable to being approached by some ISIS recruiter and being told like, hey, you know, your life has crumbled to dust around you. Everything's shit anyway. Why not, like, you know, why not reclaim your heritage and go out in a blaze of glory? I think that's a bad argument, but it sells with a lot of people. It sells with a lot of people there, and it sells with a lot of people here. But just as environmental factors can influence how a person thinks in one direction, the same thing can happen in the other direction. Al-Jilani was very much a radical in the past. It seems like he is legitimately, to an extent, adopted a measured attitude more congruent with nation building, which is exactly what we're going to need to see in the coming years, assuming this all works out. I ramble. The implications of this are massive. The Syrian refugee crisis is one of the instigating factors in the spin towards the right in essentially all of Europe because, you know, got scared of brown people. I don't know. Got spooked a little bit by immigrants. It's crazy. What happens here is going to set the stage for a lot of people for a long time. So I hope it works out well. You know? I hope the story of the Arab Spring can bookend. Well, nothing ever really bookends, but I hope it can bookend nicely. You know what I mean? So stay cautiously optimistic and keep an eye out for this, because the fall of Damascus, that's big news. That's really big news. Good luck out there.